Queen Elizabeth had two first cousins named Nerissa and Catherine Lyon who were severely disabled. Nerissa was publicly pronounced dead in 1940, while her sister Catherine was said to have died in 1961. But it was later revealed that they were actually tucked away in a mental asylum without any visits from the royal family until their actual deaths in 1986 and 2014. The US military buys a prank fart spray called liquid ass to train and prepare medics for the stench of the battlefield. This is a 1969 photo of Roman Polanski kneeling next to the door where the word pig is written in his wife Sharon Tate's blood. While Polanski was working on a film in Europe, Tate was stabbed 16 times by members of the Manson family when she was 8.5 months pregnant. Polanski has said that the murders changed him forever and that not being there is his greatest life regret. In 1997, episode 38 of the Pokemon anime aired just one time before being pulled from TV forever. The episode featured a flashing strobe effect that sent nearly 700 children to the hospital due to dizziness, nausea, and seizures. The incident nearly single-handedly ruined the franchise, and the Pokemon Porygon was banned from ever appearing in an episode again. P.T. Barnum began his career as a showman after purchasing a blind slave woman named Joyce Heth. Barnum claimed she was over 160 years old and had been the nanny of George Washington. He exhibited her until her death in 1836 and even charged people 50 cents to watch her autopsy. Syrian archaeologist Khaled al-Assad dedicated his life to the excavation of the ancient city of Palmyra. In 2015, he was tortured and later beheaded by ISIS after refusing to give up the location of precious artifacts. This was the last photo taken of Marie Joseph before she drowned in the swimming pool shown. Due to the cloudy water, her body wasn't found for 2 days, during which time people continued swimming in the pool, unaware that Marie's body was decomposing beneath them. In 2011, scientists conducted an experiment to find out what's inside the average human belly button. One individual who hadn't bathed in years hosted 2 species of bacteria that are typically only found in ice caps and thermal vents. In the year 2000, an orca whale killed a great white shark off the coast of California. According to satellite tags, the smell of the dead shark's carcass apparently caused all nearby great whites to suddenly vanish. One shark that was in the region immediately dove down 500 meters and swam straight to Hawaii without stopping. In 2001, Ashton Kutcher had a girlfriend who was murdered by a serial killer after being stabbed 35 times in her own home. Kutcher would end up testifying in the trial of the Hollywood Ripper, who would later confess to murdering at least 10 women over a 15-year span. Author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, lost her virginity on top of her mother's grave. She also kept her dead husband's heart and carried it around for 30 years until her own death. According to the FBI, if you're murdered in the United States, there's only about a 40% chance that your killer will be found and punished. In 2009, a Russian man went to the doctor suspecting that there was something wrong with his lungs. Initially, doctors thought they were dealing with a tumor, but it ended up being something they'd never seen before. It turned out that years ago, the man accidentally inhaled the seed of a fir tree and it started growing inside of him. In 2013, 16-year-old Ethan Couch killed 4 people while drunk driving. But he initially wasn't sentenced to any jail time since his attorney argued that he suffered from affluenza, a mental illness caused by growing up with too much money. In ancient Sparta, only 2 groups of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones: men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. In 1994, Los Angeles police arrested a man dressed as the Grim Reaper carrying a scythe. He was reported by various nursing homes after staring through patients' windows while wearing the costume. In the year 2000, the charred remains of Mary Lou Morris were found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Only 4 days later, the body of Mary McGinnis Morris was found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Police believe that a hitman killed the wrong Mary Morris and tried to fix it. Ever since they were little kids, twins June and Jennifer Gibbons refused to speak to anyone other than each other. By the time they turned 18, they'd committed multiple criminal offenses and were sent to a high-security mental hospital in 1981. Years prior, they made a long-standing agreement that if one of them ever died, the other must begin to speak and attempt to live a normal life. While at the mental hospital, they decided it was now necessary for one of them to die, and Jennifer agreed to make the sacrifice. In March of 1993, Jennifer was rushed to the hospital where she died of a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of drugs or poisoning in her system. It was as if she'd just died out of nowhere. Afterwards, June said she was finally liberated from her sister and was eventually released from the asylum. She now talks to people and has lived a relatively normal life ever since. In 2010, Ozzy Osbourne had his genome sequenced to understand how it was possible for him to still be alive after abusing his body for so many years. Researchers found mutations related to addiction, metabolism, and Ozzy's Neanderthal ancestors. In fact, he carries several 100,000 genetic variants that have never been seen before by scientists. Meaning if he wasn't a literal mutant, he likely would have died decades ago. There have been at least 9 different studies on the DARE program, and all of them agree that it either does nothing or only worsens the problem. Gary Webb was an investigative journalist who was one of the first to report on the CIA's involvement in the cocaine trade. A few years later, in 2004, Gary was found dead in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. His death was officially ruled a suicide. If your skin ever starts turning yellow like the photo on the left, you should see a doctor as soon as possible. This man had a condition called jaundice, which can indicate serious problems with the liver. These photos were taken before and after the man received a liver transplant. Before the murder of Shinzo Abe, the most recent political assassination in Japan happened in 1960. Leader of the Socialist Party, Inajiro Asanuma, was attacked by a 17-year-old wielding a sword. The brutal murder was captured live on television and broadcasted to millions across Japan. A group of researchers in Africa once hit a speaker near a herd of elephants and played a recording of one of their herd members who had died. The dead elephant's family suddenly went wild calling for him, and his daughter cried out for days afterward. The researchers later vowed to never conduct such an inhumane experiment again. This photo shows The Undertaker looking down at medical staff after chokeslamming Mick Foley through the roof of Hell in a Cell. The fall was completely unplanned and left Foley with multiple dislocations, bruised ribs, and internal bleeding. The Undertaker was certain he'd just killed the man, but Foley got up and even finished the match. The band Fleetwood Mac highly considered thanking their drug dealer in the credits of their most popular album, Rumors. They only decided against it after their dealer was murdered. In 2010, a commercial plane crash in Africa killed everyone on board except for one passenger, who was left with an insane story to tell his rescuers. Apparently, a man smuggled a crocodile on board, which managed to escape shortly before landing. This made everyone panic and run to one side of the plane at one time, causing it to flip and eventually crash. This devastating photo was taken in India during the Madras famine of 1877. The man is fighting the urge to sleep so that he could protect his family against cannibals. People were so desperate for food that your own neighbor could snatch up your child to eat them at any given time. In 2010, Dave Grohl was admitted to the hospital due to an overdose. He apparently consumed too much caffeine from coffee and thought he was about to die after experiencing severe chest pains. Also in 2010, a homeless man named Hugo saved a woman from a knife attack in New York City. He was stabbed while trying to help, but continued chasing the attacker before collapsing to his wounds. Security cams captured more than 20 people walking past and staring at him, but no one offered to help. He was found dead on the sidewalk more than an hour after the attack. Stricken with polio in 1952, Paul Alexander has been living in an iron lung for 70 years. He may be the only person left in one, since modern technology has created far more practical methods for respiration. But if Paul leaves this machine for even a few minutes, he will stop breathing and almost certainly die. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the sunken battleship USS West Virginia was finally salvaged from the ocean floor. On that ship, a calendar was found inside of an airtight room where 3 sailors had marked off 16 days until they died. In 2013, a French man on a business trip died of a heart attack while having sex with a stranger. A French court later ruled that it was a workplace accident and that his wife and family were entitled to compensation. Many say he did it for his family. In 2018, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin called 911 to report that she and her 12 siblings were being abused by their parents. This is sadly rather common, but what police discovered in the Turpin household was far more horrific than anything they'd seen before. The entire house reeked of human excrement, decaying garbage, and dead pets that were scattered throughout the home. Many of the 12 children had been tied to their beds and were covered in bruises and dirt. It was clear that David and Louise Turpin had been torturing their children for years, allowing them to eat just once per day and shower just once per year. They would reportedly often leave food on the table and force their children to stare at it before throwing it away in the trash. This resulted in extreme malnourishment, as their oldest son was 29 years old but weighed just 82 pounds at the time of their rescue. The kids were so clearly abused that a few doctors broke down in tears upon seeing them for the first time. The Turpin parents were handed 12 counts of torture among numerous other charges and were effectively sentenced to life in prison. While filming for Rocky IV, Sylvester Stallone challenged Dolph Lundgren to try to knock him out for real. Lundgren hit him so hard that he was sent to the ICU for 9 days and was lucky to survive. The Cordoba fighting dog was a dog breed that became so aggressive that it was very difficult to breed them, since a pair would often fight to the death rather than mate. This eventually contributed to their extinction before the 20th century. This photo from 1960 shows segregationists harassing 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white school. They portrayed her as a doll laying in a coffin to protest her attendance at the school. Chester the Molester was a comic strip by Dwayne Tinsley that featured a pedophile named Chester who was interested in molesting young girls. After producing the comic strip for 13 years, Tinsley was convicted of molesting his teenage daughter Allison over a 5-year span. Former WWE wrestler Chris Benoit is considered to be one of the most talented professional wrestlers of all time. But sadly, his career was tainted when the 40-year-old murdered his wife and son before taking his own life in 2007. After multiple tests were conducted, it was revealed that his brain was so damaged from wrestling that he had the brain of an 85-year-old with an advanced form of dementia, likely contributing to his horrific behavior. In 2012, a UK surgeon was fired and convicted of assault after branding his initials into the livers of 2 of his patients. It was only discovered when another surgeon had to perform a corrective surgery on one of the patients. In 2013, Florida man Jeff Bush was sleeping in his bedroom when a sinkhole opened up beneath him and swallowed him whole. His brother heard his screams from across the house and immediately ran over to start digging, but Jeff's body was never recovered. Frank Lentini was a circus performer in the early 1900s who was born with a parasitic twin. This resulted in him having 3 legs, 4 feet, 16 toes, and yes, 2 sets of functioning genitals. He married, had 4 kids, and lived to the age of 78. Here's a clip of Admiral Jeremiah Denton blinking the word torture in Morse code while he was held captive in the Vietnam War. He was being filmed for Vietnamese propaganda, but U.S. naval intelligence was able to decipher his message. In 1979, gold miners in Alaska stumbled upon this perfectly preserved steppe bison that's right around 50,000 years old. It was so incredibly intact that researchers decided to take a chunk of muscle from its neck and cook it into a meal. It was described as tough like beef jerky, but quite delicious aside from the muddy aftertaste. Paul McCartney decided not to tell his wife Linda that her cancer progressed and had become terminal. He didn't think it would do her any good if she knew, so she continued riding her horse until the day before she died. These were just some of the wedding rings that were taken from victims of Buchenwald concentration camp during the Holocaust. It's estimated that around 100,000 Japanese people vanish without a trace every year. Many of these cases are people simply trying to save their honor after a divorce, job loss, or a failed exam. After the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, aka Black Dahlia, reporters told her mother that Elizabeth had just taken first place in a beauty contest. Once they had enough information from her for their story, they informed Mrs. Short that her daughter had actually been viciously murdered. There's a blue whale that sings at such high frequencies that he's unable to communicate with other whales. Nicknamed 52 Blue, his calls have been heard since the 1980s but never receive a response. Waist chopping was a popular execution method in ancient China that involved sawing the body clean in half. But it was banned in 1734 after a Chinese official was cut in half and still managed to write the Chinese word for awful 7 times in his own blood. In 2005, one sheep decided to jump off a cliff, causing 1,500 others to follow. But only the first 450 actually died, since the rest of the falls were cushioned by the dead bodies below. The Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin killed 13 people in 1875, but none of them died from the actual fire. They were all killed by alcohol poisoning after drinking too much of the whiskey pouring through the streets. When former NFL safety Dave Dworson took his own life in 2011, he left a note that read, "Please see that my brain is given to the NFL's brain bank." He shot himself in the chest so that his brain would be preserved, and doctors confirmed he was suffering from severe CTE. In 2007, children going to see The Last Mimsy at a movie theater in Florida were accidentally shown The Hills Have Eyes 2 instead, the opening scene of which features a chained naked woman giving birth to a deformed baby. The theater apologized for the trauma and gave all the parents free tickets. In 1971, a Texas state representative introduced a bill that honored a serial killer for his work in population control. He did this simply to prove that most of his colleagues passed bills without even reading them. And he was correct since it was passed unanimously. This coffin-like capsule will allow people to end their own lives by lowering the oxygen level to 1% within 5 minutes. The creators of this suicide pod are seeking approval for legal use in Switzerland, claiming that it will give people the option to go out peacefully and comfortably. When the Nazi Party held its first book burning, one of the works destroyed was a 1921 play by Heinrich Heine. It contained the famous phrase, "Where they burn books, they will also, in the end, burn people." In August of 2001, actor James Woods reported 4 suspicious men on his flight, but authorities didn't take his claims seriously. Turns out there were 4 of the hijackers who had crashed into the World Trade Center on 9/11, and this was one of their test runs. In 1959, a white man named John Howard Griffin disguised himself as a black man and traveled through the Deep South for 6 weeks. After writing a book about his experiences with racism, he was forced to move to Mexico for several years due to the barrage of death threats. Albert Einstein died at the age of 76 after refusing to undergo surgery on his heart. He was quoted saying, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it's time to go. I will do so elegantly." In September of 1974, 18-year-old Milika Kostic was lured to a 12th-floor apartment by 5 men who attempted to assault her. When given the chance, she decided to jump from the apartment window and fell about 120 feet onto a cafe awning below. She died 2 days later, but was conscious for long enough to give police a full description of the awful incident. This pic shows Thomas Whitaker on the right celebrating his college graduation with his mom Patricia and brother Kevin. But in reality, Thomas flunked out of school and devised a plan so that his family would never find out. When they returned home the same night this photo was taken, a gunman hired by Thomas ambushed the family, killing Kevin and Patricia and wounding the father Ken. Thomas was initially sentenced to death for the 2 murders, but in 2018 he was spared just 40 minutes before his execution. Turns out his father forgave him and requested for his only remaining family member to not be executed. In 1991, Nigerian prophet Daniel Abadunrin apparently wanted to recreate the story of Daniel in the Bible, so he broke into a lion cage at the zoo with the belief that God wouldn't allow them to open their mouths. But as soon as the lions saw Daniel, they tore him to shreds. Back in June, a 3-year-old boy named Riker Webb wandered off from his family's yard in Montana and went missing in the wilderness for 2 days. This photo was taken when he was miraculously found alive in a shed more than 2 miles away from his home. Authorities say he was extremely lucky considering the valley he was found in is riddled with mountain lions and bears. In the heat of COVID, an Asian man was arrested for training his pit bull to drop bricks on people who rang his doorbell. Attack of the Dead Men was a World War I battle during which the Germans bombarded the Russians with a mixture of poisonous gases. The effects were so devastating that the Russians coughed up pieces of their own organs and their skin started dissolving. The zombie-like appearance was so horrifying to the 7,000 Germans that they gave up the battle and ran. This photo of Sean and Michael McQuilkin was taken at Sequoia National Park just seconds before they were struck by lightning in 1975. All 3, including their photographer sister, survived the strike, but younger brother Sean suffered 3rd-degree burns and spent nearly 6 months in a coma. After being unable to overcome the physical and mental toll of the incident, Sean sadly ended up taking his own life in 1989. After having an allergic reaction to asthma medicine in 2009, Tennessee woman Shanina Isom has been suffering from a mysterious skin condition that causes her to grow fingernails in place of her hair. In 2004, 200 women armed with kitchen knives stormed into an Indian courthouse before stabbing and murdering Akuya Dav, a gang leader, serial killer, and rapist who kept escaping his sentencing due to bribes. Every single woman later claimed responsibility for killing him. When a predatory producer assaulted one of her friends, Carrie Fisher sent him a Tiffany box with a severed cow tongue inside. She also left a note inside that read, "The next delivery will be something of yours in a much smaller box." When Britain changed the packaging of Tylenol to blister packs instead of bottles, the suicide rate from Tylenol declined by nearly 50%. Anyone who wanted a lethal dose of 50 pills now had to push them out one by one instead of easily dumping them out from a bottle. In 2013, a 60-year-old Japanese truck driver found out he was accidentally switched at birth in a Tokyo hospital in 1953. His biological parents were very wealthy, and the infant who took his place grew up to own a successful real estate company. Meanwhile, the original son was raised by a poor single mother and struggled with poverty throughout his entire life. The short-faced bear was once the most abundant bear in all of North America until it went extinct around 11,000 BC. Some scientists argue that these massive bears delayed human migration into North America because they kept killing men trying to cross the Bering Strait. Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where customers over 350 pounds eat for free. The only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes, and up to 3 people have died from heart attacks while eating there. In 1940, Walt Disney hired 11 little people to dress up as Pinocchio and wave to people at the movie's premiere. He left them on a theater balcony with enough food and wine for the day, but there was no way for them to get down. By late afternoon, they had all taken off their thick, sweaty costumes and were naked, drunk, and swearing at parents and their children. For 24 years, Missouri woman Dee Dee Blanchard pretended that her daughter Gypsy had multiple chronic conditions. She claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Dee Dee forced her to stay in a wheelchair and act disabled, subjecting her to many unnecessary surgeries and medications. Gypsy was often fed through a feeding tube and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved the girl's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever Gypsy suggested that she wasn't actually sick, her mother would physically harm her. In 2015, Gypsy was finally tired of her mother's horrific abuse and sent her boyfriend to stab Dee Dee 17 times in the back. Today, Gypsy is still serving out her 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her abusive mother. Shortly after returning from the moon, Buzz Aldrin fell into deep depression and addiction. He was quoted saying, "I wanted to resume my duties, but there were no duties to resume. There was no goal, no sense of calling, no project worth pouring myself into." Police in Pakistan are searching for a religious healer who reportedly convinced a pregnant woman that hammering a 2-inch nail into her skull would help her give birth to a boy. The woman became desperate after her husband threatened to divorce her if she gave birth to another girl for the 4th time. Lucy Studi from Iowa claims that her late father was a serial killer who murdered up to 70 women throughout the 70s and 80s. She told authorities that the man forced his kids to help bury the bodies, many of them thrown into a well that's since been filled in. Police aren't exactly sure how to approach it, especially since Lucy's sister says she's lying about the whole thing. This iconic photograph of 28-year-old Marcy Borders covered in dust was taken just after the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11. Marcy was a bank teller who worked on the 81st floor of the North Tower. She survived the collapse, but sadly died from cancer in 2014, likely caused by the toxic fumes she was exposed to. This is the gravestone of H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist and sculptor who designed the creatures for the movie Alien. On a British Airways flight in 1995, a woman was complaining of chest pain, so 2 doctors came over to check on her. They quickly realized she was suffering from a punctured lung and required immediate surgery. But the problem was they couldn't land for help since the increase in air pressure could kill her. So they performed mid-air surgery on her using a coat hanger, silverware, and a bottle of cognac for sterilization. Within 10 minutes, they'd saved her life. In the summer of 2021, 40-year-old Jerry Smith was posing on Tinder as a woman named Angie Renee when he met 18-year-old football player Isemimen Itute. After they got together and went all the way with each other, Itute realized that Angie was a man. That's when the 6'3" linebacker stomped and beat the man to death. Just earlier this year, he was acquitted of all murder charges. This photo from the early 1900s shows nurses standing with mentally ill patients wrapped in wet linens. This treatment method was thought to be calming for patients, despite many of them constantly screaming to get out. Here's a 1989 photo of South African spear fisherman Gerhio van Niekerk showing off his recent bite mark from a great white. He told reporters, quote, "It was a 1 in a million freak accident." While diving near Cape Town just 2 months afterwards, Gerhio went missing until his shark-bitten leg washed ashore a few days later. In 2004, a Georgia man was found naked and beaten unconscious next to a dumpster behind a Burger King. He didn't have any possessions or ID on him and couldn't even remember his own name. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he recognized himself but realized he was about 20 years older than he thought. For the next decade, authorities struggled to identify the man despite TV coverage and a nationwide effort. Given the alias Benjamin Kyle, the man was unable to obtain employment without his social security number and therefore became homeless for several years. It wasn't until 2015 when he was finally identified through DNA testing as William Burgess Powell, born in 1948. But despite this discovery, there's still a 20-year gap in his life history with no documented records or anything he can remember. Prior to filming The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room and talked to only himself for 6 straight weeks. He said this helped him land more in the realm of a psychopath to prepare for his iconic role of the Joker. Many believe this extreme dedication was partially responsible for his accidental overdose on sleeping pills the next year. A horrific bungee cord injury caused this man's iris to completely collapse. Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma used to be the wealthiest black community in all of America. That was until 1921 when a mob of white supremacists attacked the community with the help of the National Guard. Using guns, explosives, and even airplanes, they decimated 35 square blocks of the neighborhood and murdered hundreds of African Americans. It's known today as the Black Wall Street Massacre. Octomom Nadia Suleman became notorious in 2009 when she had 8 babies as a result of in vitro fertilization. However, Nadia claimed that while she was heavily sedated, it was her fertility specialist that convinced her to have 12 embryos implanted in her at once. All of the babies miraculously survived, but the doctor had his license revoked for extreme malpractice. This violin was used by the lead member of the band that played on the Titanic. Just like in the movie, they continued playing as the ship went down. Former beauty queen Joyce McKinney made headlines in 1977 when she kidnapped 17-year-old Mormon boy Kirk Anderson from his church. According to Anderson, she chained him to her bed frame and forced him to be her sex slave for 3 straight days. But according to British law at the time, no crime of rape had been committed since the victim was male. In 1981, David Kerwin was driving through Yellowstone's hot springs with his friend Ronald Ratcliffe and Ronald's dog Moosey. At some point, they parked their car for a better look, but Moosey suddenly jumped into one of the hot springs and started yelping. Even though many people warned him not to jump into the near boiling water, David dove straight in and attempted to rescue the suffering dog. He grabbed Moosey and made it close to the edge before letting go and sinking until his friend pulled him back out. Immediately afterwards, David muttered, "That was stupid. How bad am I? That was a stupid thing I did." He was immediately blinded since the hot spring had melted his eyeballs, and when someone helped to pull his shoe off, his skin came off with it. He sustained third-degree burns over 100% of his body and died the next day after living his final hours in agonizing pain. Sadly, Moosey the dog also did not survive. This 1994 photo shows O.J. Simpson holding hands with his children at the funeral of their mother and his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson Brown. She was brutally stabbed to death, most likely by O.J. himself, even though he was famously acquitted in court a few months later. During the funeral, O.J. reportedly spent a significant amount of time with Nicole's body and was even seen kissing her on the lips. Up until 1974, it was illegal to appear in public in the city of Chicago if you were ugly, and each offense was subject to a fine. The law was primarily made to prevent people with disabilities from going outside. While on his deathbed and completely unable to speak due to throat cancer, famous author Aldous Huxley wrote his final request to his wife to be given 100 micrograms of LSD. So she injected him with 2 separate doses of acid, and he died just a few hours later while tripping balls. Nicknamed the Merchant of Death, Russian arms dealer Victor Bout rose to power after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Using his fleet of 60 cargo planes, the arms he's brokered have helped fuel conflicts in countries including Afghanistan, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Rwanda, Liberia, Sudan, and Sierra Leone. Willing to sell weapons to anyone who wanted them, Bout has supplied both sides of multiple civil wars and is said to be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. He was arrested during a sting operation in 2008 where he was caught selling surface-to-air missiles that would have been used to kill American troops. But Victor Bout is now free thanks to a prisoner swap for WNBA player Brittany Griner, who was arrested 6 months ago after trying to bring a THC cartridge on a Russian airplane. Troy Hurtubise devoted his life to developing a suit that could fend off a grizzly bear, and was even permitted to go one-on-one with a 320-pound female grizzly. But sadly, he died in a car explosion just days before he was able to test out the design. It's rumored that when a pope dies, it's tradition to hit him in the head with a silver hammer to ensure that he's dead and not just sleeping. A pet Sphinx cat named Jazzy Purrs had to have both her eyes removed and now looks like a spooky skeleton cat. During a soccer match in 1989, 96 people were killed at Hillsborough Stadium in England after being crushed due to overcrowding, many of whom died while standing up. 22 years later, Stephen Whittle became the 97th victim. He had sold his ticket to a friend who ended up dying during the disaster. Unable to cope with the guilt, he took his own life by jumping in front of a train in 2011. When Eminem was a heavy user, he would swallow handfuls of pills without even knowing what they were. In 2007, he once overdosed on so much methadone that doctors informed him he was only 2 hours away from dying. It was such a wake-up call that he quit drugs almost immediately and has remained sober ever since. American soldier Henry Gunther was the last man to die during World War I. At 10:59 a.m. on November 11, 1918, he bravely charged at a German roadblock filled with armed soldiers. The Germans tried waving him off, knowing that the armistice would be signed within a few moments. But he apparently got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was killed instantly. In 1871, Ohio lawyer Clement Vallandigham was defending a client who was charged with murder. While showing the court how the victim might have accidentally shot himself, Clement accidentally shot himself. He won the case, but he died. According to his former doctor, Michael Jackson's father had him chemically castrated as a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. Located in Paris, this is the tomb of legendary scientist Marie Curie. It's lined with an inch thick of lead since her remains are still radioactive to this day. A Nile crocodile named Gustave has killed as many as 300 people in Burundi over the last 50 years. He's evaded dozens of capture and murder attempts as he can be identified by the 3 bullet scars on his body. The 2,000-pound monster croc is already nearly 20 feet long and is said to be still growing to this day. Actor Mickey Rourke was a heartthrob of the 1980s until he quit his acting career to become a boxer. But after multiple facial injuries and botched plastic surgeries, he now looks like he's wearing a mask of someone else's face. Earlier last year, an Alabama man was arrested for criminal littering after putting flowers on the grave of his fiancée who died in a car crash in 2021. While filming an episode of Storage Wars, Daryl Sheets once discovered a dead body wrapped in plastic. Police later determined that the previous owner had murdered his wife and locked her body in a storage unit. Serial killer Edmund Kemper became friends with the very police officers that were investigating him. They called him Big Ed at the local bar and never would have suspected him in 1,000 years. When he initially confessed to being a serial killer, they laughed at him because they thought he was pulling a prank. In 2003, a skeleton measuring 6 inches long was found in a remote part of Chile's Atacama Desert. Due to its elongated skull and rather developed bones considering its size, the specimen was initially rumored to be an alien. But after extensive testing, scientists determined that it was more likely the skeleton of a stillborn human girl that had close to 70 different genetic mutations. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a slightly lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. In 1924, gifted college students Leopold and Loeb planned out the perfect murders simply to demonstrate their superior intellectual abilities. But after kidnapping and murdering a child, they left an abundance of evidence and were swiftly convicted of murder. This was the last photo taken of legendary rapper Tupac Shakur just minutes before he was gunned down on Las Vegas Boulevard in 1996. Tupac was hit 4 times and was put on life support at a nearby hospital where he would end up dying a week later. His body was cremated the next day and members of his rap group Outlaws smoked some of his ashes after mixing them with some kush. Here's a 1907 mugshot of Bertha Baranda after she was convicted of mayhem for slicing off her husband's penis with a straight razor. In 1939, Gone with the Wind actress Hattie McDaniel became the first ever African American to win an Oscar. When she was dying from cancer in 1952, her final wish was to be buried in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in LA. But the request was ultimately denied since the cemetery had a strict all-white policy at the time. When he was a sophomore in college, NBA legend Karl Malone had a child with a 13-year-old girl. The son grew up to become NFL player Demetrius Bell, but he said he only met his dad on one occasion after graduating high school, where Malone told him that it was too late to start a father-son relationship and that he would have to make his way on his own. In 2007, 73-year-old Sherman Sizemore was undergoing surgery to have his gallbladder removed. An anesthesiologist had given him drugs to paralyze his muscles, but forgot to administer the anesthesia until 16 minutes after the first cut was made, meaning he felt everything. Doctors later gave him an amnesiac in hopes that he would forget the trauma, but it apparently didn't work on his subconscious. After 2 weeks of suffering from horrible insomnia, nightmares, and paranoia, Sizemore ended up taking his own life. After Star Wars The Phantom Menace was released in 1999, Jar Jar Binks quickly became the most hated character in the franchise. The backlash was so devastating for Ahmed Best, the actor who played him, that he nearly took his own life. The first chainsaw was invented by two Scottish doctors in the year 1780. It was originally used to help open up the pelvis during childbirth. In 1958 North Carolina, a white girl told her parents that she kissed two black boys aged 9 and 7 on the cheeks. The girl's father then arranged a mob to go to the boys' homes where they threatened to lynch them and their parents. Soon enough, police showed up where they proceeded to arrest and severely beat the young boys. Charged with rape, they were placed in jail for 6 days without being allowed any contact with their parents. They were detained for nearly 4 months before finally being pardoned by the governor. It's infamously known as the kissing case of 1958. This is the unbelievable anatomy of conjoined twins Brittany and Abby Hensel, who are now 32 years old. Notably, they have 4 lungs but 1 rib cage, 2 hearts, 1 liver, 2 stomachs, 1 set of intestines, 3 kidneys, and 1 pelvis. Modern bulletproof vests were invented in the 1970s by pizza shop owner and former U.S. Marine Richard Davis. He came up with the idea after being wounded when a pizza delivery turned into a shootout. He shot himself in the chest nearly 200 times to test his invention. This is an example of a pillory which was used as a form of capital punishment in 19th century China. The man in the photo can't reach his hands to his face, so he must rely on pedestrians to give him food and water like a dog. The device also made it incredibly hard to sleep comfortably, essentially torturing the prisoner until they died from starvation. In 1999, Martin Lawrence collapsed from heat stroke while jogging in heavy clothing to prepare for his role in Big Mama's House. He recovered in the hospital after entering a 3-day coma on a ventilator due to his body temperature reaching 107 degrees. This map published by FEMA shows the potential U.S. targets in a nuclear war scenario. If you're from the Northeast like me, you might want to start building that bunker. Here's a photo of 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. being led to the room in which he was executed in 1944. He was given the electric chair after being convicted of murdering 2 white girls in South Carolina. The all-white jury determined he was guilty after only 10 minutes of deliberation, and he became the youngest person to be executed in U.S. history. Stinney was exonerated 70 years later after a court finally recognized that he'd received an unfair trial. In 1991, a decomposing woman was found hanging from a shower in a New Mexico motel room. Despite an image of her being found in the room, she and the man in the photo still remain unidentified to this day. Her first name is believed to be Becca, only thanks to an anonymous tip given to police in 2021. The animal that causes the most deaths in the U.S. annually is deer. This is due to them blindly running into roadways, resulting in an estimated 200 deaths per year. The runner-up is bees, wasps, and hornets, accounting for around 60 deaths annually. Tennessee man James Washington was always the prime suspect of a 1995 murder, but there was never sufficient evidence to charge him. That was until 2012 when he was having a heart attack and confessed to the murder since he believed he was on his deathbed. But he ended up recovering and was convicted based on this confession, which he later tried to take back. Bubble boy David Vedder was born with a severe immunity disorder where he basically had no immune system at all, meaning even the most harmless germs could easily end up killing him. Because of this, he spent his entire life inside of a bubble and could only receive air, water, and food if it had been sterilized first. At age 12, David received a bone marrow transplant from his sister, the only treatment available that would allow him outside of his bubble. But the marrow sadly contained traces of a dormant virus, and David passed away a few months later. Kidam Cave in Kenya is believed to be the original source of Ebola and Marburg, two of the deadliest diseases known to man. A 2007 expedition found evidence that the vector species was most likely the African fruit bat, or more specifically, their guano. Either way, the cave is known to scientists as one of the most dangerous places on the planet. After Carrie Fisher passed away in 2016, her ashes were placed inside of an urn shaped like a giant Prozac pill. The giant pill was apparently her favorite possession since it was a reference to her battle with bipolar disorder. This famous mummy appeared to be satisfying himself during his final moments in 79 AD. To Catch a Predator was canceled in 2008 after a Texas district attorney took his own life when he was exposed as a child predator by the show. The entire scene was captured by an NBC camera crew that entered his home. In medieval Germany, a divorcing couple could legally settle their disputes with a marital duel. The man was given a weapon but had to fight out of a hole with one hand tied behind his back, while the wife could move freely with the rock-filled sack but had to wear weighted clothing. If the husband lost, he was beheaded, but if the wife lost, she was buried alive. Former face of Subway Jared Fogle became famous after attributing his 275-pound weight loss to eating nothing but Subway for a year straight. But in 2015, the FBI completed a 4-year-long surveillance operation to bring him down for owning excessive amounts of CP. They began investigating after Fogle made some disturbing comments about children to a female reporter, who started recording her conversations with him and passing them on to the FBI. In many of these conversations, he bragged about molesting children and even asked her if he could put cameras in her kids' bedrooms.
What if they put a camera in your kids' room? Would they be okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Would you rather have it in your son or your daughter?
Fogle was sentenced to 15 years after pleading guilty to his heinous crimes involving children and owning more than 5 terabytes of CP. Last January, California man Dharmesh Patel was charged with attempting to murder his family by driving their Tesla off a cliff. But the entire family ended up surviving the 250-foot fall due to the near-perfect safety rating of Tesla cars. 26-year-old Bella Kilmartin has a rare condition that sends her body to sleep when she experiences strong emotions. She once almost drowned in a pool after laughing at a joke caused her to pass out. The euthanasia coaster is a concept for a steel roller coaster designed to kill its passengers. It was created by Lithuanian artist Julijonas Urbanas, who says the goal of his concept is to take lives with elegance and euphoria. The 7 loops put the body under so much stress that the brain is starved of oxygen, since the heart will struggle to pump blood against the tremendous G-force. It's meant to be a fun way to die. In February of 2013, Canadian tourist Elisa Lam went missing while staying at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. Weeks after her disappearance, police released footage of her last sighting as taken by an elevator surveillance cam. In the video, Elisa can be seen looking outside the elevator and jumping back in, almost like she was trying to hide from somebody. She then proceeds to make incredibly strange hand gestures as if she's trying to feel something that isn't there. Soon enough, guests at the hotel began to complain about low water pressure in their rooms. Some even claimed to management that the water was black and gave off a strange smell. Upon investigating, authorities finally found Elisa's body floating in one of the hotel's water tanks 19 days after she first disappeared. Her death was ultimately ruled an accident, with bipolar disorder being a significant factor. As part of a grim psychology experiment starting in 1961, triplets Edward Gallen, David Kelman, and Robert Shafran were separated at birth. They were placed with adoptive families who were lower class, middle class, and upper middle class, none of whom were aware of the other siblings or any part of the experiment. According to their adoptive parents, as babies, all 3 of them would bang their heads against the bars of their cribs in distress. This was likely the result of severe separation anxiety, which continued on as the boys got older. By the time they were college age, David and Edward had been in and out of psych wards, while Robert was on probation after his connection to a 1978 murder. A few years later, they were reunited through happenstance but never fully recovered from their mental health issues. as Eddie tragically took his life at the age of 33 after a lifelong battle with depression. Actress Lisa Robin Kelly, who played Eric's sister on That 70s Show, had a major drinking and drug problem. She was soon replaced on the show and ended up dying of an overdose while in rehab. In 2012, a Missouri family sued the previous owners of the house they purchased after brown recluse spiders started bleeding from the walls. An expert estimated that the house was infested by at least 5,000 of the venomous spiders. In 2020, a Florida man was arrested for allegedly sticking his hand in peanut butter and punching his neighbor who was allergic to nuts. Just last Friday, Idaho Governor Brad Little signed a bill that would allow firing squads to execute death row inmates when lethal injection drugs are unavailable. This is because it's becoming increasingly difficult to obtain these drugs since pharmaceutical companies don't want their products to be associated with killing people. Right. After saying he was a murder victim's friend while being interviewed by a local news station, this was the moment when Stephen McDaniel found out on live TV that the body of the woman he killed and dismembered was found.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Authorities soon brought McDaniel in for questioning, where the murderer kept his body eerily still during a 2-hour interrogation. He was possibly in a dissociative state or simply tried to avoid moving at all to prevent the detectives from reading his body language. Stephen pled guilty to the murder in 2014 and is now serving out a life sentence. 6'9" serial killer Edmund Kemper killed and decapitated at least 10 women throughout the 60s and 70s. In 1973, he brutally murdered his own mother before turning her head into a dartboard. Once he was in prison, Kemper was interviewed by former FBI agent Robert K. Ressler. The guards locked them in a small room, and a panic button under the table would alert them when the interview was over. So after the interview, Ressler hit the button, but no one responded. Noticing his panic, Kemper told him, "If I went apeshit in here, you'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't you? I could screw your head off and place it on the table to greet the guards." 30 minutes later, the guards finally entered the room to retrieve the petrified Ressler. In 2019, a Brazilian gang leader tried escaping from his 73-year prison sentence by disguising himself as his teenage daughter who was visiting. He planned on leaving her behind in his place, but the guards weren't fooled by his disguise and stopped him at the exit. 3 days later, he hung himself. In 1962, a 10-year-old boy from Mexico City found an industrial radioactive capsule and left it in the kitchen cabinet of his home. Within a few months, the boy, his pregnant mother, his 2-year-old sister, and his grandmother all died from severe radiation sickness. In 2013, a Brazilian soccer referee was involved in a heated argument with a player and ended up stabbing him to death. Outraged fans quickly stormed the field before stoning him to death, decapitating him, and putting his head on a stake in the middle of the field. In 1994, 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez was admitted to a California hospital with symptoms thought to be related to her cervical cancer. She was acting extremely confused and her heart rate was rising rapidly as medical staff did everything they could to return her vital signs to normal. But eventually, nurses noticed a strange oily sheen on Gloria's body, as well as a fruity, garlicky scent emitting from her mouth. Her drawn blood smelled like ammonia and had strange tan-colored particles floating in it. Soon enough, the nurses were having breathing issues and began passing out just from being around her body. Within a few hours, 23 people fell ill and 5 were admitted to the hospital. Ramirez ended up dying from kidney failure and a hazmat crew was called in to transport her body. It turned out she had been taking the extremely toxic substance dimethylsulfone as a home remedy to treat her cancer, the most likely explanation for her poisonous body. In 1935, Grace McDaniels became a circus freak show star known as the Mule-Faced Woman and was paid $175 per week. Her severe facial deformity was caused by a cancerous lip tumor that ended up taking her life in 1958. In the 12th century Catholic Church, innocence was judged by dunking the suspect's hand in a pot of boiling water. If God had not healed the wound within 3 days, the suspect was found guilty of the crime. In November of 2004, Peter Porco was struck in the head 16 times with an axe while he was asleep in his New York home. But he miraculously woke up the next morning, made breakfast and coffee for himself, and finally fell dead while picking up his newspaper. He had been completely unaware of his battered state and the pools of blood all around him.